Welcome to Question Time. Thank you very much. With me tonight, the Tory MP for Clacton, Giles Watling, elected last year, perhaps better known as the actor in Bread. No? Yes. Yes. Labour's Shadow Transport Secretary, Andy McDonald. And McElvoy, the senior editor at The Economist magazine. Kate Andrews, Associate Director of the Free Market think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs, and the comedian, author, and a contestant last year on I'm a Celebrity. Get me out of here, Shappi Khorsandi. Now, you may have spotted we've been trailing her. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Liz Truss, was to have been on this panel tonight, but there was a serious incident on the railway line. Her train's been held between two stations, and she's simply unable to get here. And I'm really grateful for Giles Watling, the MP for Clacton, coming in at absolutely no notice at all and stepping into her shoes. Before, David. You're not an understudy now, you're on the stage. You can argue as ever on this programme from home, of course. Our hashtag is BBCQT on social media. You can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter and on Instagram. So, our first question from John Fenton, please.
Why did the Chancellor give more income tax to the rich rather than the poor?
Give more income tax breaks, I assume, to the rich rather than the poor. OK, Giles Watling, you're sitting in Liz Truss's seat. What's your answer for the government?
Well, I can remember in the early 70s when the income tax was really heavy on the rich, and I can remember the days of super tax. And you know what the result of that was? People left the country. We want to encourage the great people to stay here and create our economy. Our economy needs building. And you've got to remember, the government also took 32 million people out of income tax altogether. I mean, it's amazing. We've lessened the burden on hard-working people. So it's a great success story recently, and the budget the other day just proves that.
OK. Andy McDonald.
Well, we've put an alternative proposal to the House of Commons today and said that we would want to see taxes increase for the very richest in our society. Those that... Yeah. So those people who enjoy earnings of £125,000 and more,
but
we'd like them to
hang on a second.
more.
You accepted, at least you appeared to accept, what the Chancellor had done, didn't you?
Well, there's...
your namesake as Shadow Chancellor.
Well, what happened, David, was that the allowances were increased for basic rate taxpayers and higher tax. It wasn't a choice. There wasn't an option to split that. And what we've said consistently is we would not impose any increased taxes on those of low earnings and mid-term earnings. We would seek to recover higher levels of tax from those who enjoy six-figure sums and beyond. They're the ones who could make that contribution. I would also like to see...
But were you against what he did? Were you against what he did in the budget?
Well,
your party voted for it.
That would not have been our proposal. We would not have done that. But what I don't want to do is take money out of the pockets of hard-working people at either at the poorest end of the income scale, and if we simply are not prepared to do that, and we will completely commit to our promise made in the 2017 election to look at the highest earners to make a small contribution to help our economy.
Okay, you, sir.
Wearing my accountant's hat, I'm a retired chartered certified accountant, I think you'll find the national insurance threshold has gone up. So though the tax-free allowance has gone up, it's been taken away by the increase in national insurance threshold. So it's been a bit of a give and take, in fact.
So you think there's a bit of sleight of hand?
Yes. It's not as good as it looks. It's good.
Not as good as it looks for the better off?
Well, there are more allowances, perhaps the better off do benefit, but it's not that huge gain that you might think on headline figures. OK.
Anne McElvoy, can you throw light on what you think happened on Monday?
Well, I think what happened was that the Chancellor was trying to please a number of crowds, and therefore some people who were clearly meant to benefit as middle-income taxpayers means that some people above them also benefited too. So I do see the Labour point on that. I'm still a bit unclear, though, which bits that Labour would actually address and take away, because you find once you get to, say, 100,000, which is a substantial amount of money, but it's not super rich, and that some people in the public services would earn that. Just let me finish if I could. Is that actually it comes down very sharply. So it is really not the very, very rich who are benefiting from this budget. I mean, they are probably the people that all governments need to try a lot harder to catch. And I think that it's not quite fair to say that this was intended to give money to the rich. It also did, and I think this was very welcome indeed, it raised that threshold for those at the very bottom end of the earnings spectrum. And I'm very pleased that Philip Hammond did that. In the middle, there are some winners, some losers. As the gentleman said, strangely enough, we're not mentioned by the Chancellor. We found out about the national insurance threshold the day after. That's,
you need a chartered accountant
they really are,
to spot it, you see, in that thing.
We should have had him with us on the day.
OK, yeah, you, sir.
Very much, Lee. Right, we should tax the rich more. We've got people who are working on minimum wage, problems with minimum wage, right? How can you afford properties and stuff like that? Homeless is on the rise, and it's scary that people are committing suicide because the ends don't meet, and some of them have been working about 50 or 60 hours a week to let them to live, and children are getting into poverty. We're going to have the rollout of the universal credit soon. What are we going to have? More homeless, and we're going to have more children in poverty this Christmas. It's a disgrace, right? And there's blood on the hands to Theresa May and all those who vote for it. It's a disgrace.
Shappi Khorsandi.
I would like to agree with my friend here in the front. And your original question was why didn't they give more tax breaks to people on the lowest income? And that what you just expressed is the reality. It's because this government and the people who staunchly support them can stomach it. And that's the reality that we're facing. They can stomach it.
You said that. I'll come back to you. You said in the purple shirt.
I work in community development, so I'm not a big high earner, I work for a charity, but the Chancellor was talking about maybe having a few pounds extra each month in saving with the tax, but I much rather collectively that money goes to supporting our NHS, supporting helping bring business rates down, to stop high streets closing on a regular basis, and other services as well in the community, rather than just having a little bit of a teaser, as it were, to improve your tax. Actually use that money collectively to really make a difference in the community.
Kate Andrews, one of the analysis said that the tax cuts overwhelmingly benefited better off households. A, is that true? And B, do you approve if it is true?
Well, I think there is truth that if you benefit from that threshold on the higher side going up, then you're going to benefit. But I think it's very important, and to Anne's point, we're not talking about the millionaires and the billionaires being targeted. We're not talking about the untouchables. We're often talking about neighbours. People who are going to benefit from that threshold increase are NHS doctors, their dentists, their air traffic controllers, their train drivers. And my frustration isn't that the Chancellor gave them a tax break, it's that he didn't give more people on lower incomes a bigger tax break. If you...
So you're with the Labour rebels on this?
Well, I'm happy to take anybody's side who recognises that the tax burden is the highest it's been in nearly 50 years. That is ridiculous, and we have to figure out a way to get people who are on lower incomes to get more of that money back in their pocketbooks. And if you look at where the Chancellor decided to spend, when he found that windfall, he put 97% of every 97% of every pound he found into spending, 3% into tax cuts. If you actually want to have a balanced economy, we should have seen more tax cuts. And I think everybody should benefit from them. And so let's bring taxes down for the poor as well.
OK. The person up there, yes.
I actually just want to pick up on the point that Giles mentioned about bringing so many people out of the tax bracket. And this is something that's mentioned by the Tories all the time, how many people they're bringing out of paying tax altogether. surely, when you look at it being 12,500, shouldn't we be worried about how many people are on such low income that they can't... I don't know, directly to Giles, I don't know if you're aware, but 12.5 grand in day-to-day life doesn't actually go very far.
Yeah, that's the beginning of the tax break, of course. That's where the tax gets started to be paid, and I couldn't agree more that we've got to get people out of low incomes and we've got to get people back on their feet, and the only way to do that is to develop a strong economy. I mean, we have put the minimum wage up, and Labour would borrow $1 trillion to cover their promises. No, that's exactly what the figures are.
No,
and that would put us back to where we were back in 2009. When initially...
Wait. You can have your...
But to say...
Let's just say it, and then you can...
We are coming out of the recession now. There is light at the end of the tunnel. We've been holding our nerve, and the great British people have been utterly brilliant. They've persevered. We're seeing the end, and we're beginning to get the benefits from that. And there will be more soon. In the spring, there'll be the new spending review. We'll see what happens then. And I'd just like to say on the elements of high taxation, one of the great things that's happening now is we're looking at the big companies like Google, who have not been paying the money they should pay for running huge businesses. And I'm on the Department of Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, and I've seen these people close up, and I've been over to America, and I've seen what they earn, and we are starting to tax them properly now. That should help us pay for the NHS, which, by the way, we're putting £120 billion a year into right now. Highest ever in history.
Can I...
Yes, go on.
Can I just pick up on something that Giles said? Because he said that, you know, some time ago when the high earners got taxed, we saw them leave the country. So are we not taxing them because they might leave the country, and the poor are OK to tax because they're captive?
I take your point, absolutely. But we do live in the real world, and the top 5% earners, I would suggest, are mobile. By their very nature. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of resources, and actually we want to keep them here. We want their taxes, of course we do. But we've got to be realistic about the level at which we set that tax. We want to keep them here. We want the brightest and the best in this country working for us.
You on the right here.
I watched the budget as it was happening in my living room, and 3 or 4 times throughout the speech, Philip Hammond was saying, you know, the British people, you know, they've persevered, they've done it. Who has austerity actually impacted, though? It's not this whole population. It is the few at the bottom end of the spectrum that have had to deal with it.
Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I think you make an excellent point. The cuts have been disproportionate to young people and to those who are on welfare benefits. And that's a very, very important point to make. But my frustration at the moment is that we have a panel here talking about how to get more tax. Let's not punish aspiration. You know, let's make this a country where if you work very hard, frankly, even if you just do the normal 9 to 5, you can pay for yourself or your family and make a real living.
OK, let's...
And the highest earners can make a reasonable contribution to that. And what this government did, first off, they made a political decision to give tax cuts to the very, very richest and a corporation tax cut to the corporates who have had the benefit, by the end of this term, of 110
And McElvoy.
Just a quick one. It just reminds me, listening to the debate and a lot of the chat since the budget, the French finance minister a few centuries ago said that taxation was about extracting the maximum amount of feathers from the goose with the least amount of hissing. Taxation is not perfect. It's not the only mechanism that we have for curing our ills. And I think what we're slightly beginning to drift into, even as we're talking, is a sort of idea that if you take a bit more here or you add a bit more there, then we solve our economic problems. Really, you know, our position is not that good in the UK. I'm sure we'll come to Brexit later. But we really do need to get, you know, beyond just thinking that the way that we deal with our problems is by tweaking tax bands. We have to look beyond that. And this budget really was not ambitious enough in what it tried to do about our broader economic outlook.
I want to bring in a question from Craig Elliott, because it comes to the heart of what you were saying about the way that government is spending its money. Craig, whereabouts are you? Let's hear from you.
An end to austerity. When will communities like Clacton feel it?
An end to austerity. The question was an end to austerity. When will communities like Clacton feel it? Well, you're the MP for Clacton. Brief answer from you, and then we'll go around the table.
As I said, I believe we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and I've been working really hard. I've been working really hard.
No, but the when. The tunnels can be as long as you like, or as short as you like.
Exactly.
You can see the end of a tunnel.
And we're building HS2 right now. There are very long tunnels involved there. But as we in Clacton are at the end of a line, one of the things that I'm always batting on around is that our infrastructure is appalling. Well, I was pleased to note that in the budget there is money put down for roads and rail, and I am fighting the cause to get us properly connected, and Clacton will feel that benefit. And we've got regeneration going. We've just had £36 million spent on our coastline, and if you walk out there now, our beaches are superb. That was an incredible bonus for Clacton.
So is the austerity over?
Austerity, we're seeing the end. We're seeing the end.
Craig, does that answer your question?
I don't think so. I mean, essentially this area is lacking 20-odd thousand jobs to actually get it up to national levels. It has higher than, twice the twice the proportion of workless households than Essex specifically. Essex itself is falling behind against the EU average GDP. I think it's a really frustrating time, and we really need to change the way we think about how we invest in local economies and relieve control from central government and put it much more in the local government domain.
Because it is, McElvoy, it's true, isn't it, that apart from the NHS, there are still a lot of budgets that have been going down, not going up at the present.
That's absolutely right.
So when do you think the end of austerity will come?
You know, I think it's a very daring promise for Theresa May to have made. Did you notice that she said it was the end of austerity or something like that? Philip Hammond is more cautious. He said it is ending, which sounded like it could go on for some time. I think one of the problems with that is to say austerity is, I mean, we've never been absolutely clear what we thought the definition of austerity was, let's be honest. I mean, it's a phrase that it means not having enough to go round. There's a difference between saying that a time of a big squeeze in public spending is coming to an end, which is, I think it is, at least in some areas, and saying there will be enough to go around, and that communities, particularly those that have particular problems or need to have more investment in education and employment.
It's that the squeeze reverts to the level it was before. That's when austerity's ended.
Well, that doesn't
it doesn't
do it,
end because it's beginning to improve.
Well, it's a good question, isn't it? But I mean, it's going into sort of quantum physics. But I don't think that's quite right, because I think
question
what will happen
time is just the place.
That's about as much as I know about that. But if you look at the amount that is being spent on the NHS does need the money, but it needs a lot more besides. It needs reform. I know people don't like that, but you can't simply rest on your laurels in public services. The bit that's really missing for me, since you ask about the end of austerity, is education. I mean, I thought this was an absolutely shocking budget on education. And how can we... I'll shut up, but I think we really, and I think Philip Hammond will be punished with that phrase about the little extras for education. If you want to know when things really start to pick up, it's when your education, your employment are beginning to work better together in a sustained way.
Okay,
I don't think we're there.
Enough. Shappi Khorsandi, we'll come to that maybe.
The end of austerity, that's... You know, this promises that it's coming to an end. Everything's coming to an end. The world's coming to an end. We'll all end one day. It just seems like this... bizarre promise they're making. For me, I would recognise the end of austerity, not just when more things are spent money on, but the things that we have lost through austerity are returned to us. Half of the Sure Start centres since 2009 are gone. We have lost over £1 billion since 2009 in arts funding. That is a crucial part of being a human being. I travel all over the world, touring in theatres. I want to mention the Beggars Theatre in Milan, where the audience, bless them, bring their own chairs to performances because they've had 100% of their funding cut. Schools, you know, my kids' school, we have to sell 1 billion fairy cakes to mend the corner of the sports hall. Those things that we lost, we want back. We want food banks not to be needed in our first world country. That's when austerity has ended.
Okay.
austerity isn't over, and it isn't going to be over for the saying of it. It will continue. There's more to come. We've had billions ripped out of social care. There's more social security cuts coming down the line. Our schools are underfunded. They've had an 8% cut. And you're quite right, talking about the little extras to pay for whiteboards when you don't have teachers to write on the whiteboards is the biggest insult we've heard in a very, very long time. We live in a country where there are 123,000 children being taken into care. 4 million children are in poverty. Homelessness is on the rise. It's an absolute outrage. We can regulate ourselves infinitely better than this. Austerity hasn't come to an end, but what you are sure of, that austerity doesn't work, and it's an admission that it doesn't work, and that's the message we take away from this. It's completely busted flush, and this government needs to change tack, and change tack quickly.
Can I just ask you again, in that context, why then did you, Labour, approve and your Shadow Chancellor approve of cuts that most affected people on the 40% tax rate, the higher tax rate, if you say is true about the need for money?
Because the threshold increase to 12,500 gets to some of the poorest people. It's very small amounts of money, but I'm going to be the last to say we're going to stop that money filtering to those people. But
what about the 50,000 for the richer?
We've said it quite clearly. We will raise taxes for those above £80,000. Now, that's the question.
That seems to be dodging the question.
It's not dodging the question.
Well, I'm asking you a simple thing.
Why did you bring into the system so that you can deliver on all of the spending promises that we made?
Why did you approve letting people who pay 40% tax pay it not at 46,000, but not until they earn 50,000? In other words, not to pay 40% until they're earning 50 grand. Why did you go with that if what your argument is the more money we can put into schools and all the other things, the sooner austerity will come to an end?
Because we made the solemn promise in 2017 that for 95% of the population we would not raise taxes. We would look to the top 5% who have got the ability to pay a little bit more. It's quite simple, and it's about sticking to that
then you won't raise that
solemn
much if
promise.
it's a little bit more from a small number of people.
All right, the woman there, come on.
£6 billion for it.
When you're not voted in, get in and then do what tell us what you're going to do. But at the moment, you've got nothing that you can actually do because you've not even been voted in.
Well, that's the nature of opposition, I'm afraid.
All right, the man there on the corner there in the spectacles, you, sir.
The lady, the economist, is it Anne?
Yes.
You said we don't know what austerity is, the definition of austerity. Well, we do know what the definition of austerity is, and it's not just cutting back, it also includes being able to go for more taxes on people that can afford to pay more taxes. That's austerity, but the ideology of the Conservatives is to cut, not to tax. So the reason that it was so swinging is because there wasn't any attributable tax to actually bridge the gap between the deficit. And there's a lot of talk about the deficit, but during the time, the debt has increased. In the last 8 years, the debt is trillions. I don't know what the number is, but it's huge.
OK, the numbers are almost meaningless, aren't they, really? The woman there. Yes.
We're always focusing on taking from one person, putting on another, and you say homelessness is on the rise. Why aren't we doing anything about that? Rent is rising. We can't afford it. At the moment, rent is the same as my wage. What is going to be done about that? It can't carry on like that.
Your rent and your wage are the same?
My rent is my wage.
Oh my God.
Kate Andrews.
I mean, so well said. The government could make decisions now to bring in policies to bring down the cost of living, build some more homes, bring down the cost of rent, let people get on the housing ladder, and let them get on with living their lives. Absolutely. But I want to go back to the original question put forward by the gentleman about when areas like Clacton are going to feel these economic benefits. And I'm very worried about this because the UK has one of the most centralised systems for raising tax in the whole of the G7. And when you look at what they spend money on, where does that transport budget go to? £800 per head in London, £200 in your area. Don't give them more power, give them less. Devolve those powers. Bring the tax-raising powers, bring all of it, bring business rate decisions to your local area so businesses can be attracted here, so they can come here and create the jobs. Because for everybody on a low income, the government's quite proud of the fact that they get £4 of spending for every pound of tax they put in. How's that working out for you? Do you feel that spending here? No, you don't. They feel it down south, and I think that has to change, and it has to change immediately.
Okay. I'm going to go to one or two. I'm going to go to one or two members of the audience, and then I'll go on to another question. Yes, the woman in pink there.
I'd like to support your point of view there, that there is a huge discrepancy between urban and rural funding. There's recently been a study and report across a parliamentary group looking at it, and per head, the funding in London compared to, for example, coastal towns like Clacton, Great Yarmouth, you know, all around the coast, that really, really needs looking at and addressing.
OK. And you sit in the front here.
Yeah.
May I ask why austerity was necessary in the first place, Mr McDonald?
Well, I don't think it was. It was a choice that the incoming government made in 2010.
Why?
We had an economy that was growing, and they chose to give massive tax cuts to the very richest and use that money to benefit them and the corporations, slashing corporation tax from 28%
Actually, your
all the way
party went
down
on a
to
spending
17%.
spree, and a lot of people had to pay
I mean,
back.
that's a totally outrageous thing to do when you then visit all of those deficits on the poorest people in this country. Totally outrageous.
Giles Watling.
Well, we all know that immediately before the 2010 elections, we hit the biggest recession we've seen in generations, and it was a Labour government that brought us that recession, and we had to do something about it.
Rubbish.
It was a global thing, and it had to be resolved.
Nothing to do with Lehman Brothers.
And now, the deficit now is at the lowest it's been since 2001.
Strange.
And what happened between 2001 and 2009? Labour were in power.
So you're agreeing with him? You were agreeing with him, were you?
I am, yes.
You
Very
think
much so.
austerity was
when
necessary?
the Conservatives or the coalition took over and they looked at their bank balance and saw there's nothing there, what can you do? You've got to save money.
You sit in the middle there, yes.
Yeah, it's just kind of maddening to hear how tone-deaf the government can still be, to give us a little pat on the head and say, you know, you've tightened your belts, well done, you got through it. Not all of us have had to do that. It's the people at the bottom that have. And you say there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's another tunnel straight ahead as we come out of the EU. We still don't know what that's going to look like.
Well,
Let's just touch on the wicked politics of this. Jennifer Hepton, let's have your question.
After the sugar-coated budget, is this just a sweetener for an early election?
All right. Are we being sweetened up for an early election, Shappi?
I reckon we are. I definitely reckon
Your
we
eyes
are.
glinting with excitement.
I thought, oh, they're softening us up. And Theresa May said, oh, no, that wouldn't be good for the country, but that didn't stop her last time, so I reckon we are.
All right. Anne?
Well, we're very brave of Theresa May, and it's not her strongest suit, let's be honest. Early elections and Theresa May don't go too well together. I think there's an extent to which this budget was like a sort of flotation device for the government and for the Conservatives, who had been very bedraggled, and the Brexit negotiations have been grinding on. And I think quite cleverly, if one's, you know, you have to sort of give a bit of credit where it's due to Chancellor for understanding that people need to sort of hear something in a budget. It was getting a bit dire. I mean, what was the point of him being there? And I think he really wanted to sort of give his party something to sort of ginger them up, try to get them to come together behind a Brexit deal if one is on offer. But I think you're right that in the background there will be some thinking that possibly it's going to be a bit of a rocky road through this deal if we do get one and beyond, and that it could end in an early general election. I'm not sure how many people in the audience would absolutely welcome that, but I think it is possible, and that they don't want to go to the country not able to offer something. Of course, it has also divided Labour, perhaps a little bit more than Andy has been utterly frank about what they should do on the economy. That also might hint that they're thinking about an election campaign.
Andy McDonald? Want to answer that point?
I don't know what Brenda of Bristol's going to make of another election, David. She might not be very happy
get her
about
on.
that.
Brenda can't become the arbiter of democratic politics. And
I don't know, some people might prefer it. Yeah, I think there is that possibility, but it depends where Theresa May's going walking this weekend. You know, if she's going off to Wales, we might come back and have another announcement. But I think it's probably unlikely for the time being. But you can't rule it out. These are volatile, fragile times, and I do want one. Bring it on as quickly as we can. I would have that election any day.
Charles Watman.
Well, I don't think there's going to be an election, and I really don't think we should have an election. As I walk around Parliament and I talk to other politicians from both sides of the House, both Labour and Conservative, everybody wants us to hold firm. That's the feeling I get. Yes, there are divisions in Labour. Yes, we have our disagreements in the Conservative Party. We are a broad church. But everybody is holding firm. We've come up with the answers and we want to deliver Brexit, and I think that's the most important thing. March the 29th next year, we're leaving the EU, and there's nothing going to stop that. And no election's going to come, in my view. With regards to the budget and giving out sweets, well, sweets tomorrow is the Labour Party's speciality. The £1 trillion borrowing, are we going to give back all the university fees?
You said it twice.
You backed off that fairly quickly. The announcement of university.
Why do you keep saying £1 trillion? There's absolutely no substance to that at all.
If it's not going to be an election, you don't need to start doing your manifesto. And the best time to go on for time. Just stick with the point.
Look, I try very hard not to make predictions. We live in the age of Donald J. Trump being president of the United States. So I think, you know, any prediction can go out the window. But I think it is likely a holding budget. We don't know what's going to happen as the UK leaves the EU. We're told that a deal could be just a few weeks down the road, but we've been told that before. So it's definitely a holding budget. I think that there was a real attempt to give short-term giveaways that are going to have to be paid for down the road. I almost hope there's not a general election anytime soon, because some party, any political party, needs to realize that you can't keep promising an infinite amount of spending and not back it up in some meaningful way. Otherwise, young people, my generation, has to pay for it down the road.
OK. I'll take one more. You've had your hand up a long time. Your arm's exhausted, but have a quick word.
Yeah. The Economist has said that there's a 40% chance of a no-deal outcome next March. If that is the case, then how can we have any confidence in the government at all, and shouldn't we then go for a general election?
Sorry, in which circumstances? If there is a no-deal outcome. OK, well, we might come to something like that a bit later on. Brexit always rears its head at some point, but what I suggest we do is, first of all, let me tell you where we're going to be next Thursday. We're in Dulwich. And the week after that, we're way out in Milford Haven. So if you'd like to come, Dulwich or Milford Haven, if you're listening to the programme, that's where Question Time will be. Dulwich next Thursday, Milford Haven the Thursday after that. On the screen are the details of how to apply, and I'll give them in full at the end. But Chris Amos, let's have your question, please.
Should the police spend more time catching violent criminals instead of investigating hate crimes and cold cases?
And this, I suspect, Chris, was inspired by Sarah Thornton, the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, saying today the police should focus on burglaries and violent crimes instead of misogyny or historic allegations against dead people. These can't be priorities for a service that's overstretched. Andy McDonald.
I think that just shines a light on our current difficulties. You know, we are 21,000 police officers down, and not a single penny was directed towards frontline policing. So is it any wonder that police chiefs are saying they need to make choices and prioritise what they're going to investigate? I get that entirely, but they shouldn't be put in that position. They should be enforcing the law of the land, not choosing which laws to enforce and which not to. And in terms of historic crimes, if there is technology available to be able to bring justice and bring some peace to families who are wanting answers to why their loved ones were murdered, for example, we shouldn't deny them that opportunity. But my goodness me, we should not be in a position where police officers are having to say a crime has been committed and I'm not going to investigate it because I don't have the resources. And that's what this is about.
Shappi, if you were a police chief like Sarah Thornton with the problem she has, or says she has, on policing. What would your view be of the difference between catching violent criminals, as she put it, and hate crimes?
I often I often think to myself, what would I do if I was a police officer? Just to clarify, that Sarah Thornton specifically talks about misogyny, not or hate crimes. And if it was me, I would think it's a crying shame that I'm put in a position to choose because of funding, because in no way was she saying or denying that these are crimes and these crimes are terrible, but she cannot adhere to the law equally because of funding, and that is the only thing we should be looking at. If I was her, I don't know, I'd probably make a placard and go on a protest. I enjoy them.
Which acts of misogyny are criminal and which are undesirable, unpleasant, but not criminal acts?
You're asking me that?
Well, you said if you were the police chief, this is what you'd do, so I assume you knew.
I'll tell you something about misogyny. Misogyny and sexism, I believe, is the most difficult ism to deal with, because you can receive sexism from the closest quarters, from people who have no idea they're doing it, from your bosses, your colleagues, members of your family. It's such a tough battle to have for women, and I think often women feel isolated on their own, navigating their world and dealing with it. It's very, very difficult, and I think that what needs to happen, and is happening to a massive extent, I think we should take the conversation out of social media more, because it's becoming so polarised, of exactly what it is and what is harmful and where it becomes a crime. We need to have those conversations, and long conversations, not 100 and whatever characters you're allowed to now.
Kate Andrews, the Law Commission is reviewing this and trying to make up their minds whether misogyny and hatred towards men and ageism and other things should become hate crimes. What's your view?
Well,
and what would you do if you were in the position?
I'll definitely come back to misogyny as a hate crime, but I just want to say that the UK is currently spending more on the foreign aid budget than it is on policing in Wales and England. So there is fundamentally a problem here. But then...
Sorry, you say that as a fact. Do you disapprove of the choice?
But but to your point, David, you know...
do you disapprove of the spending on foreign aid?
I think that humanitarian aid is crucial. I think a lot of foreign aid is wasteful. But I think that, you know, when you can't even take care of people at home and when kids are out in the parks getting stabbed, your priorities really aren't in the right place if you're spending less there than you are abroad. But to your point about misogyny, if and when, and let's hope it's when, they do get this increased funding, misogyny that results in violence against women or harassment against women or a crime that we already call a crime should absolutely be prosecuted to its fullest. But I am deeply concerned that currently the Met Police have 900 officers dedicated to tackling hate online and trolling Twitter to see what men are writing mean comments to me and my other female panelists up here. I don't think that should ever be a crime in that sense. And so they do need more resources, they do need more funding, but let's make sure when we talk about misogyny, which is disgusting and awful in any circumstances, when it actually comes to trying people and putting them behind bars, that they've committed a crime, not been offensive, because those are two very, very different things.
But before you came on this afternoon, I was shown some of the things that have been written about you appearing on this programme on Twitter.
They're not very nice.
Well, I would say not very nice is a gentle way of putting it. I say they were vile, disgusting, loathsome remarks by people hiding under the cloak of anonymity, and they were unspeakably horrible. But what you're saying is you don't think the police should pay attention to that or try and find the perpetrators. Is this because you believe in free speech, or is it because you think it's just a waste of money?
I believe in free speech wholeheartedly. To be honest, I feel very sad for those people. I like to respond to it with some level of humor. If those people start threatening or harassing or attacking, that's very different. But as somebody who receives that abuse, as a woman, frankly, I just want to come back and give them a piece of my mind, and I want the real money to be spent on protecting women who are dealing with domestic violence and harassment in the street.
Okay, you sit at the back there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I agree fully that it's outrageous that Sarah Thornton's having to make those choices and express it that way. But I think it's a bigger tragedy that she's addressing the wrong audience, because as the collective political classes in Westminster have shown, as the recent report has shown, these guys can't even sort their own house out, let alone sort out the country.
Okay. And you, sir?
I've been a victim of domestic abuse and violence for 6 years at the hands of a woman. It's clear in Essex, as well as other parts of this country, I don't count. I had an appointment at 11 o'clock, or 3 o'clock this afternoon, with 2 Essex detective inspectors. Neither of them turned up. Misandry is the same as misogyny, but a man is the victim. It should all be the same, it should all be treated the same. 12 men kill themselves every day. How many of those men commit suicide because domestic abuse and violence, parental alienation? It's not about, oh, a woman's suffering, oh, a woman's suffering. It's about somebody is suffering domestic abuse and violence. It shouldn't matter.
Giles Watson.
I absolutely take your point there. It is people that suffer when abused like this. But I'd like to pick up on the online abuse. It is absolutely appalling what happens to people on online. You may be strong enough saying you want to have a go back. There are those who don't. And there are those who actually do take their own lives because of what's happening online. The online companies are not taking responsibility. They think they just provide the platform and other people can say what they want on it. I believe in freedom of speech, but we are entering a realm here that we don't know about. This is all new. You can have some very weird ideas. And in the old days, you lived in your village, you'd be the nutcase on the edge of the village. But these days, you go online and you've got 3.4 billion people or whatever it is on Facebook. You are bound to find a few people who validate your position, and you go off and do something really bad. And that's the danger of online abuse. It's an echo chamber.
Shappi, do you want to come in? I'll come to you in a second. Yes.
I think as a culture, as a world, we need to understand that online abuse is new to us. I had an experience recently when I stuck up for a friend online, and the abuse I got from people was quite overwhelming. And what I remembered I could do is delete that app. It sucks you in. We start to meditate on the horrible things that people say. And I think that because it's new to us, we don't know how to deal with it. We need to learn, and we need to teach young people, because I've got 2 children. I tell them, you never know those people online, who they are. They don't have the moral high ground over you. Delete, don't engage. And I think that's an important thing to instill in ourselves and everyone else.
You, sir.
Did I understand that lady correctly? And she said that giving foreign aid was causing our kids to be stabbed in the park.
No, that's...
That's what you said. That's what I took you to say.
That's not what I said at all. I said that charity starts at home.
Right.
And that when you are dedicating a certain proportion of your budget that is actually larger to people overseas, much of which is being poorly spent, and you're not focusing on the kids in your own backyard, then priorities are not in the right order. I do think that certain elements of foreign aid are actually crucial, especially when it comes to humanitarian crisis. That's where most of the evidence suggests we can be most helpful. But, you know, there is only so much money to go around, and I would like to see the UK take care of its own and then look to the rest of the world.
Just to... It's 0.7% of GDP, isn't it?
0.7%.
Yeah, what would you cut it to?
I honestly don't know.
You have to be honest about it.
I can't tell you if it's 0.2 or 0.3%.
You wouldn't argue the point if you hadn't thought it through.
The reason that I don't know if it's 0.2%, 0.3%, as far as I'm concerned, it should be the amount that is needed when crises occur around the world. If there's a tsunami, if there's an outbreak of Ebola, that is what we need.
Not for infrastructure projects. And
most of the majority of those infrastructure projects, they very often go into the hands of some very shady dictators around the world, and you know, I don't want to be a part of funding that. So I think I don't know what the exact percentage is, ask the humanitarian experts, but it's probably less than what we're spending now.
Okay. The woman there in the spotted dress, yes.
There is horrendous starvation in the Yemen, for instance, and our country is partly culpable for that, because we are supplying arms to Saudi, and we're continuing to do it, and we're not protesting enough about their involvement in the Yemen.
Okay. Are you in support of the spending on foreign aid?
I'm in support of spending on foreign aid.
At the level it is?
At the level it is. Because there's another side to this as well, beyond humanitarian, which is terribly important. And I believe it's very heavily overseen now, so we don't have so much, as you say, going into the pockets of dictators. But the other side is quite simply that it's also of economic benefit. If we can lift these countries up and help them get on their feet, then we can trade with them. And if we're there first, we'll then get the deals, and it will help us in the end. And it's better than buying tanks, guns and aeroplanes to deal with rogue states. We help states get themselves together, stand up on their feet. It's money well spent, if, as you say, it's spent wisely.
Let me take a couple more points from our audience, then we're going. You in the blue there, yes. Pointing at yourself, yes.
You say that helping other foreign countries will build them up, enable us to trade with them, but it doesn't always work like that, does it? Because there are countries that will go, well, someone else is offering us a better deal, so yeah, you might have been there first, but that's not going to matter if somebody else comes along with a better deal.
We're straying away from the question. I want to get back to the question, which was about... I've forgotten what the question was now. It was about hate crimes and violence. Yes, you say, yes.
I mean, you're quite right, because I think Shappi made an extremely important point, which, to be perfectly honest, I think you've missed. The causes of crime and the causes of behaviour are crucial in all of this. Earlier on, she mentioned about the Sure Start Centres. I worked for 10 years as a learning consultant in Middlesbrough, and we focused upon emotional health of the communities and the organisations and the schools. If you want a measurement of austerity, I think you've got it there. If you look at the health and well-being of communities, that will give you a guide as to how healthy they are. A lot of these crimes, a lot of the behaviours can be explained because of deterioration and a neglect in that area. And I think people need to appreciate that these things, no good just looking at the end thing, they're symptoms, but look at the causes of it and try to underpin that. If we made health and well-being the priority in our society, I am confident within a relatively short period. And if you look at Scandinavia, they have done this. We ignore them at our peril. And if we did that, we would be a lot better off in all of the things you've discussed so far this evening.
Just a brief point from you, sir, since you spoke already about your predicament.
What? A letter from the Minister of Justice.
Start again.
I have a letter from the Minister of Justice saying all domestic abuse and violence is a serious matter, no matter what the gender of the victim. But that's not true in the country we live in. You try and go and get help, it isn't there if you're a man. I was raising 2 children on my own. There is no support for men. There's loads of support for women, but misandry, which is the male version of misogyny, is ignored.
The woman next to you is shaking her head. Did you not agree with that?
I just don't think that there's enough support, full stop, for people. I totally get what you said about spending on foreign aid. It's no use building up other countries if our country's coming down itself. We need to get our infrastructure right and protect our people and find the money for it. I'm sorry, Giles, but I don't think the Conservatives are doing that at the moment.
Okay.
Policing.
Very brief.
Well, it's just to come way back to Sarah Thornton, that surely what matters is that the police are doing the job that the police should do, and there are many aspects of misogyny and misandry that we need to be policing ourselves as a civil society. I'm not absolutely sure that I think that the police should be acting as sort of sociologically as that. What you've referred to, Sarah, very sorry to hear about your circumstances, but an awful lot of women are not getting the support that they need either. But you have to make... You have to really decide what you want from your policing. It's not good enough to say, oh, they should have enough money to do everything. It's not possible. It's also not right. There are things the police should do, and there are things that we as a civil society should do. And I think Sarah Thornton had a good point, that the police are now being sort of dragged into doing too much that is really not their role, particularly given that they have a lot of problems on their own doorstep. The clear-up rates are too low, and we have rising recorded crime. We need to focus on that.
What is the percentage of burglaries? 3% are solved or something?
It's very low. I mean, so I don't know that statistic, but I think overall, I mean, we've seen it fall to sort of about 10% of crimes being thoroughly solved, at least at the first go. And that is, I think, and I don't want to sound brutal about this, But I think people do know what they want the police to focus on, and I think they do want them to focus on particularly violent crime is rising and the clear-up rates.
Okay.
You have to sometimes just be a little bit simple about things.
I'm going to move on to another question, I think. You wanted to come in, just come in.
I don't know that the assumption that more is going into crimes that weren't previously seen as crimes.
Yes.
I think it's a false assumption. The police are cut everywhere. And one of the big drains on their resources is the amount of internet crime now, whether it's, you know, scams on older people or violent threats to people. And that takes a hell of a lot of resources to deal with. And that's a difference in safety on the streets, safety on your computer, with children being targeted.
A range of new crimes all the time.
I think the dichotomy that she posed was not really right.
OK, we'll go on to another question. Darren Baidu, please. Let's have your question.
Should Brexit be halted until the results of the Aaron Banks inquiry are known?
So, Aaron Banks is being investigated by the National Crime Agency for spending huge amounts of money, 8 million I think it was, that came from sources that were foreign. That's the allegation. Aaron himself says that he wants a full and frank investigation and it'll put an end to ludicrous allegations levelled against me. But the question was, should Brexit be put on hold until we know whether the campaign was illegal? What do you think?
I'd just stop at half of that question. Yeah, Brexit should be halted.
And why so?
But seriously, you know what? I was one of those people. I voted to stay, and I was one of those people that was like, yeah, you know what? It's a democracy, and this is what's happened. But we have since found out that I think Dominic Cummings, campaign director for Vote Leave, said recently that without the sort of point about immigration, they wouldn't have. That he doesn't think they would have won, and without the promise of £350 million per week to the NHS, they wouldn't have won. However, we know that Daniel Hannan has said if anyone thinks that when Brexit happens we're going to have less immigration, they're going to be disappointed. So now we know that Brexit was a sort of false prospectus. And so I think it should be halted until we know what the deal is, because we were shown a Brexit that doesn't exist now. You know, a lot of people voted for it because of the immigration, because of the NHS money, and that's not true. Therefore, eventually we're going to be shown a Brexit that is true, and then we should vote on that again. And if it is the will of the people, it will still be the will of the people.
OK, well, you neatly avoided answering the mischievous question, which is whether, since there's an investigation into Aaron Banks, should everything be put on hold. Katie Andrews.
No,
Kate Andrews.
Oh, it's all right. I respond to "Hey you." Yeah, it's fine. I don't think it should be put on hold. Aaron Banks was not part of the official Vote Leave campaign. He was running his own organic grassroots.
He spent more than the official campaign spent.
But that is for all kinds of commissions and even potentially for a court to look into. Obviously, these are allegations. It's, you know, he will have a very different side of the story. But he was not a part of the official campaign. There were two official campaigns, one to stay, one to leave. And the Leave side won, and I don't believe that it won because of immigration or because of the NHS. I think those were important points to people. But this was about something much bigger.
That's what Dominic Cummings said, though.
Well, I mean, it's great. It's all very well and good that he said that, but I think that voters said something very different to what Dominic Cummings said in that instance. I think they said that we want the opportunity to seize what Brexit has to offer, to step back out onto the global stage, and to have our voices heard.
OK, but just... Do you think it's an important issue whether Aaron Banks got £8 million worth of money from abroad which he shouldn't have taken? I mean, you at the IEA under the same charity commission looking at the money you get, whether you get it fairly. Is it important where money comes for these kind of activities?
Of course, it's very important that everybody obeys the law. Of course it is. But I think that when individuals, and again, this is alleged, I don't want to make any false accusation. If an individual is accused of bad behavior, whether that be to the tune of £800, £8 million, £8 billion, whatever it is, you can't shut down the entire democratic process. And this was not the official campaign. And I think it is a very important issue, David, and I think it should be handled through a court of law, not by us on a question time panel or by trial by media. It should be handled the proper way. But you cannot ignore the democratic will of the people because someone has perhaps very badly misbehaved.
Okay.
And I think that would be very unfair to Brexit voters and to the whole country to put it on pause for that reason.
Andy McDonald.
No, I don't think the process should be halted because of this issue, but I do think it's very, very important that we do know where money comes from, who is supplying campaigns or lobby groups or whatever it will be. And it's also crucially important that people observe the electoral law. We've got a precious commodity in our democracy and we want to nurture it and treasure it. And when people use and abuse their position to force home points, that warrants proper investigation. So I think Aaron Banks should get what he asks for, which is a thorough investigation, and he should, if he's found to have transgressed, then the consequences will flow. But I think we need to be concentrating on respecting the decision that people have made, but focusing on leaving the European Union on terms that will not damage our economy and not undermine jobs. It's critically important that we get this right. And at this moment, I have absolutely no confidence in this government to secure a negotiated settlement that will be in our best interest. Okay. There's no evidence that that's going to happen, and I think we should be mindful of it.
Okay, Charles,
I agree with you, Andy, on the first part of your comments, of course. I think that the Aaron Banks thing should be absolutely in the clear, should be in the courts or a thorough investigation. He's asked for it, he should get it, and we should get to the bottom and get the truth. As far as Brexit is concerned, we're sitting here in a constituency that some 70% voted leave, and some 60%, some 10 months later, voted for me. Now, I was a known Remainer, and I voted Remain. However, the vote went the way it went, and we have to exercise what the people said to us. This is a democracy. I'm not that keen on referenda. They're divisive by their very nature. It's yes or no, turn on and off. And look at the state of the country now. We're divided by referenda. We've spent, since 1215, when King John signed the Magna Carta, we've spent all that time developing a parliamentary democracy. You like what I stand for or you don't? Vote for me or not. But we shouldn't do that again. I don't think we should have another referendum. And here's the important part, if I may, David. Here's the very important part. If we stopped Brexit now and there were another vote, I truly believe the result would be very tiny one way or the other. And we would then risk seeing civil unrest on our streets. We've got to go through with it, and we must finish the job in March.
All right. And very briefly, if you would, because we're pretty well out of time.
I think we're all kind of agreed that Aaron Banks deserves to be properly investigated. I worry about it being a bit sort of grasping at straws for people who say, well, this is the reason to revisit Brexit. That's not the right reason. Engage the arguments on Brexit itself. At the moment, we can't decide anyway which Brexit would be being suspended. Would it be the Chequers Brexit? Would it be the EEA Norway Brexit? Would it be the Canada plus minus Brexit? So let's get I think we might be close to getting a deal back. Let's see if Parliament can get its heads together and do what sensible people probably here would do in the audience and beyond, which is a compromise is the best way out of this, the best way through it.
Thank you very much. Apologies to those of you who have your hands up. Our time's up. We only get the hour, so when the hour's over, I have to stop. Thank you all very much. Next Thursday, we're going to be in Dulwich in South London. There we're going to be joined by a man who's been described as the most influential public intellectual in the Western world, and equally as a professor of piffle, a campaigner against political correctness, Jordan Peterson. The week after, we're in Milford Haven, and believe it or not, at the moment at any rate, Aaron Banks is going to be on the panel. So that's... we'll see. We'll see. That's 2 weeks from now. So there's the number on the screen, 0330 123 9988. If you'd like to come to either of those programmes, go to the website if you prefer, follow the instructions. If you want to argue from home about what we've been saying here, you can join Adrian Chiles on Question Time Extra Time, which is on BBC 5 Live right now. My thanks to this panel, particularly thanks to you, Giles Watling, for coming in and standing in for Liz Truss at the last moment. I'm grateful to you. Thank you all of you who came to Clacton. Until next Thursday, from Question Time, good night.
Join Andrew Moore for topical discussion and analysis this Sunday morning here on BBC One at 10. Next this evening, Andrew Neil casts his gaze back upon the past 7 days in This Week.